us to our meeting this afternoon. Of course, most of us are attending by Zoom because of a all too well-known situation. Do we have any apologies for our meeting this afternoon, John?
Yes, sir. We have apologies from Jessica Harvey and Timothy Austin, both of whom are traveling now, and so are actually either in airports or on airplanes right now.
Okay, thank you. And seeing then that we do have a quorum, so we'll continue our meeting, and I ask that we consider our meeting to be in session from this point forward. Now, I should indicate that it's a general meeting, which means that members of the public and indeed the press are connected this afternoon, listening in again by electronic means. And I take this opportunity to welcome all of them. I would indicate that for anyone who may be with us for the first time, that by law we are mandated to have that our general meetings be held in public. And that's in public as opposed to a public meeting, and simply meaning that observers are not able to interact with the council as the meeting progresses. But again, I welcome all of you. Council members, are there any declaration of interest, any interest in anything that's on the agenda before us this afternoon?
No.
No, Mr. Chair.
No.
Okay, good. Thank you. I've heard all no's, no. Yes, I think that to be the situation. No interest in anything on our agenda for today. We then move on to number 2 on our agenda, confirmation of minutes. That's the minutes from the 21st of July, 2021, our last general meeting. The minutes have been circulated, and I do believe that for the most part, we would have gotten back to John with any corrections, additions, adjustments, deletions we thought were necessary. But I would ask again, with the minutes as they are before us now, are there any amendments for page 1? How about page 2?
I just had a question on page 2. I'm told that section 4 E in reference to Cayman Sands, I'm told that this version of the minutes has more information than a version that was circulated. Apologies, this was prior to me being on council, but that is the message I've been given. I just wondered if there was any informational notes that could be shared with council that kind of support any additional points that were put in there. But as I say, I didn't receive those initial version of the minutes.
So that was, is this you talking about the additional information that was, or the amendments that were made to this section?
Yes, but I'm trying to remember what they were right now, Richard. It was.
It is the, I can remember, it's because we needed to ensure that there was a good understanding as to why there was a noted by the council rather than a ratification of the original decision, and it was based on the advice that we'd gotten from the Attorney General's chambers. And although the former version of the minutes said noted, there was no explanation of why that the decision had been noted as opposed to ratified. So the recommendation was to include the detail there about the Attorney General's chambers recommendations to the NCC.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
And by the way, that was explained at the meeting. It's not that we didn't discuss that at the meeting. That was the reason that the council took the decision to note rather than to ratify.
Okay, thanks, Jenna.
Because we had received this advice. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, is that it for page 2? Page 3? Page 4? And page 5? Okay, in that case, I would ask that someone move that the minutes be adopted.
I move, Mr. Chair. Lisa?
I second Adrian.
Thanks, Lisa, Adrian. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Don't know how to.
Those against? Any against? Any abstentions? In that case, the minutes then have been adopted. Next on our agenda, of course, is matters arising from previous minutes. And under this section, we have our annual report.
So as council recall, this is the annual report from last year. And council had reviewed it previously at the previous general meeting, had wished to have a few areas expanded. That was done so. Particularly here in section 2.3. Just noting council had done work on the on turtles and interim directive for turtle concept critical habitat, the mangrove conservation plan, Sybil's crown bear conservation plan, the Asia caymanensis draft plan, also the Nigga Bay Pond management plan, and of course working on enhanced marine parks, spirit gun licensing, and game bird hunting. Regulations of various descriptions, yes.
Any questions?
No, I would just thank John and the rest at DOE for including those sections or that level of detail. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. Okay, if there's no other questions on it, then I would ask that we have someone move that it be adopted.
I can move, Lisa.
A seconder?
I second Stuart.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any against? Any abstaining? Adopted. Under section 4, or reports, A, climate change.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd be interested to hear others' views on the topic, but if you'll permit me just a few minutes to share my takeaways from the United Nations Climate Change Conference in Glasgow.
Sure, please, Lisa. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, in relation to the NCC's work, or at least as I see it. Of course, I'm sure as everyone else, we were pleased to see that Premier Panton, whose responsibility includes sustainability and climate resiliency, attended COP26 along with the National Trust-led youth contingent. And I'm hopeful that those delegates offset their travel-related emissions. But as part of the global community, I feel our challenge ahead is to devise measures that would meet some of the various pledges that were set out in the Glasgow Climate Pact, namely ending deforestation and reversing or restoring degraded lands by 2030, as well as cutting methane emissions by 30% by 2030, which would effectively avoid 0.3 degrees of warming by 2040. But despite these pledges and the nationally determined contributions by most contracting parties to halve their emissions by 2030 and be net zero by 2050, this only limits global warming to between 1.8 and 2.1 degrees C above pre-industrial levels, far from the 1.5 degrees C needed to avert the worst effects of climate change on small islands and low-lying states. With current warming at roughly 1.2 degrees C, our people are already witnessing climate impacts on their homes, livelihoods, and natural environment. Therefore, the Cayman Islands must stand up policies and actions within this decade to adapt to this sobering longer-term reality of yet more delayed action and ambition from the international community. With the Paris Agreement officially being extended to the Cayman Islands now that COP26 has concluded, there are aspects of it, including commitments on the global stocktake, which revolve around reporting on the state of adaptation efforts and other priorities that will be required. So what does this mean for the NCC's charge? Not fully, but some thoughts that I have are certainly around the groundwork that has already been laid for tracking deforestation rates by the Department of Environment, who continues to report on the wetland loss for the west side of Grand Cayman. Expansion to include other forest habitat loss would address the Glasgow Climate Pact under the Paris Agreement and complement the National Energy Policy's requirement for tracking the rate of development. We've heard calls also from the public and other groups to ramp up protected area nominations for cabinet consideration, particularly high value conservation areas that function as important carbon sinks and enhance the resiliency of our settlements and these natural systems. Being very strategic about these nominations would entail accounting for removals of these natural systems in our national greenhouse gas inventory to better report per capita emissions that recognize the role of these sinks and reservoirs in offsetting some of our current 15 tons per person greenhouse gas footprint. It would also allow us to better site select for systems rehabilitation and enhancement projects delivered by government, hopefully in concert with the private sector and others. But understandably, we need environmental protection fund allocations in the coming years that are commensurate with the task of enhancing our natural system of protected areas for these purposes. While the NCC and DOE have already input into the draft national planning framework to better capture climate change implications and the types of interventions needed, we must now look with greater focus at Plan Cayman and marrying it to an updated climate change policy, which would, among other things, utilize information from the Natural Capital Accounting Project, which I hope we will hear more about in the near future, incorporate opportunities in particular for nature-based solutions arising from the upcoming climate change risk assessment into specific area plans and supporting regulations, and develop user-friendly climate risk resilient tools for development and project reviews. Notable to watch may be the multidimensional vulnerability index still under development, but that has provided preliminary scores for the Cayman Islands, and perhaps also the Global Resilience Index initiative being employed by some insurers and financial institutions. I'm encouraged by those banking and financial institutions with local presence but global reach, who spearheaded COP26 sessions that have sought advice on reducing biodiversity loss locally and climate impacts in an effort to adjust their lending and investment practices, and to develop products aimed at greater uptake of renewable energy across the sectors, green infrastructure, and other adaptation projects. Some of these institutions are signatories to the UN Principles for Responsible Banking or Investment, and support the COP26 creation of the International Sustainability Standards Board to develop globally consistent climate and sustainability disclosure standards. The methane pledge will require us to have a focused management of our existing forests and grasslands and to limit their conversion to other land uses. Also addressing our agricultural, waste disposal, and wastewater treatment practices and embracing technological opportunities. And of course, reducing transport emissions, particularly from cars. All this, Mr. Chair, to say that these actions align with the NCC's goals and objectives for 2021, stated in our 2020 annual report that we've just ratified, and the Seizing the Moment to Greener Transition document, also noted on today's agenda, as well as many objectives of the broad outcome 5 in government's strategic planning statement. I remain hopeful that we will get the support to deliver these and set the Cayman Islands on track to aligning with the global targets pledged. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I open the floor to other members' views.
Thanks, Lisa.
One issue I would like to see us is modify the management plan for mangroves, because I think it needs expanded. Yeah. I don't think we have enough clout in controlling what happens to mangroves when it comes to planning. Thank you.
I also wanted to just mention, Mr. Chair, Lisa, thank you very much for your report. And one of the things that for us that has bubbled up is going to be very important is more education for our community and the public generally about climate change and some of the areas, as you spoke about, where we'd like to see change. We're very hopeful, having taken the youth delegation over to COP and seeing their involvement, that this is something that we also know there's a generation coming up that will be very interested in being part of this conversation. So we just see a lot more education generally for people to understand why this issue is so important.
Mr. Chair, I would also just like to thank Lisa for her report and to say that I completely concur with her assessment of the outcome of COP26 and what that means in terms of local actions here, both from a policy and also, I believe, legislative perspective. Lisa indicated, I think, that the government would be undertaking climate change risk assessment, and I just wanted to confirm that is underway. The current sort of phase is evidence gathering by the people at the Center for Environment, fisheries and aquaculture science in the UK who are leading the climate change risk assessment for us. When they have produced their report, the local community and local stakeholders such as NCC will then become involved in basically ranking and scoring the long list of risks and hopefully opportunities that the report will contain. So stay tuned for that in terms of calls for involvement from members of the NCC. I just want to say too that the ministry has been throughout the period of COP26 been trying to sort of increase communications, I guess, with the public. I did the address at the recent healthcare conference, specifically looking at climate change and health, the impacts of climate change on health. And I also have been on several radio shows, both at Radio Cayman and when Cayman Crosstalk was still going on, to talk about COP26 and climate change and what it meant. So the conversation certainly has started, and I think that the next year is going to be telling for us in terms of our ability to move some of the necessary and urgent actions forward. So thanks, Lisa, for that. And if anybody has any questions about what I've said, please do feel free to ask.
Thank you, Gina. I would just say that I reached out to the ministry and the Premier himself several times just to touch base pre-COP and since COP, especially as some of these groups that I alluded to had been in touch. And some of them are renewable energy generation development companies, as well as banks, specific banks looking at where to apply their lending, credit, and or investment dollars in Cayman, but obviously on a regional and a global scale as well. And I haven't had any response. So just to maybe see if you could give a light touch on that. And because some of them will be wanting to come before the Premier and maybe his wider cabinet as well. And I will continue my efforts, but maybe also through DOE and or NCC, we could just get that in the ear of the ministry to keep an eye out for things like that coming down the pipeline that could address their broader agenda.
Definitely, Lisa. I'll follow up with that and I'll get back to you should I get any further than you have. But I'll definitely follow up.
Thanks. Are there any further questions with regards to climate change? Question or thoughts and or thoughts? Okay, in that case, we'll move on to our next item, and it's excuse me, ratification of the East-West Arterial Environmental Assessment Board. What?
Okay, so I think members will recall that in 2019, Council appointed an environmental assessment board after approving the need for an EIA through a screening opinion for the East-West Arterial. The first stage, obviously, of the EIA is a scoping opinion prepared by the EAB, and that has also been done. In the original EAB that was appointed in 2019, the National Roads Authority were a member of that EAB. However, they have now sort of transitioned to being one of the main proponents for the East-West Arterial, and they therefore found themselves in a conflict with sitting on the Environmental Assessment Board. So in order to facilitate the timely production of a second scoping opinion for the full road, which was requested of us because the initial scoping opinion was only for the road from the portion of the road from Hurst Road to Lookout Garden. But the NRA have since requested of the EAP scoping opinion for the entire road from Hurst Road to Frank Sound Road. So in order to be able to do that with a duly constituted EAB, we came to council with a request to empanel an EAB that removed the representative from the NRA and replaced that representative with someone from Public Works. So that was done by correspondence. And after sort of several back and forths via email, just prompting people to vote or indicate their position with respect to the change in the appointment of the EAB. That actually happened sometime between the 19th and the 25th of October. So really what I'm proposing is that we simply ratify the change in appointment of the members of the Environmental Assessment Board for the East-West Arterial, essentially now empaneling an EAB that would be comprised of the standing members of the EAB, which would be the Director of the Department of Environment, the Director of Planning, the Deputy Director for Research in the Department of Environment, a representative from the Water Authority, and a representative from Public Works' Major Projects Office. So I'm just proposing, my motion is that the National Conservation Council ratify the appointment of the above listed members to the Environmental Assessment Board for the East-West Arterial EIA.
And then, just to clarify, that's actually a slight amendment from what was published because the Deputy Director is also nominated in the EAB.
Yes, the Deputy Director is under the EIA directive, a standing member. So myself as the chair, the Director of Planning, and the Deputy Director for Research are standing members of any EAB, and then the other members are appointed according to the project under consideration.
So the question therefore is that we ratify the appointment of the EAB as was just outlined by Ms. G. Could I have a mover for the ratification?
I propose we accept the ratification of the appointment.
Okay, a seconder?
I second. Adrian.
All those in, you sure, Adrian? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Sure, and any against?
I'm abstaining.
Miss
Just to
Ms.
make
G
that
is abstaining, sure.
I have
didn't
to
hear
abstain
any-
as well.
Okay,
I also abstain.
okay, give me. I don't have all the white voices down packed yet, so give me some names of the last two.
Pierre Foster, abstaining.
Okay.
And
I think
Richard Milam abstaining.
okay, Richard Pierre and yeah. Okay. And there were none against. And the others in favor then. Okay. Thank you. Ratified. Under 5 in new matters, we have WP04 ratification of appeals. And this is appeals read Bogus Sand Road development.
Yeah. So members are aware that through decisions taken during working group and email discussions previously, decisions were taken to both apply for leave for a judicial review, as well as to file an appeal to the Planning Appeals Tribunal in relation to this Central Planning Authority's decision on to approve the application for two-story cabana on block 5B parcel 162, despite having received a direction from the NCC under DOE, under delegated authority from the NCC, to not approve that application. So essentially, this motion is to ratify both the decision to seek the grant of leave for a judicial review and to file an appeal with the Central Planning Authority as a sort of backup in the event that the judicial review found that the proper procedure was to go for a planning appeal. Just as an aside, no one believes that avenue is open to the NCC, i.e. the planning appeal. But we did it on the advice of our legal team just to preserve our position, essentially. So the motion is that the National Conservation Council ratify the decisions to, one, seek the grant of leave for a judicial review, and two, file an appeal with the Central Planning Appeals Tribunal in respect of the Central Planning Authority's decision to disregard the direction of the National Conservation Council issued under Section 41 of the National Conservation Act in relation to the Central Planning Authority's decision to approve a two-story cabana on block 5B parcel 162, such application being submitted by Cayman Property Investments Limited.
Okay.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Just going to ask a question on a point of clarification. The point 2 there, where it says a decision was taken to instigate the judicial review and planning appeal. Could you just confirm when that decision was taken and who the decision was made by?
I don't have the dates for that, Richard, but the decision initially was discussed with the chair and the secretary. It obviously there was a time limitation on when we could do all of these things. We had, I think, a matter of days when we became aware of the situation. So we then brought it to a working group meeting, and it advised, and council at that time agreed to taking both things forward. We could pull those minutes up, but I don't have. I'm afraid I just don't have the dates in my mind right now.
Okay, thank you.
But you should have draft minutes that you can, are not draft minutes, approved minutes, working group meeting minutes that should reference both these things.
Okay,
I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
Yes, we would. So the question then is that we ratify the decision as laid out in the proposal here. If there are no other questions on it, then can we have a mover for the ratification?
I move. Tricia Bradley.
I'll second it.
Those in favor?
Aye. Stuart.
Aye, Lisa.
And are there any against? How about abstentions?
I abstained. Richard.
Richard. Okay, so
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I don't you want to take that as everybody else having voted for, or if you want people to actually record their vote on this one. Just council, just to clarify, we only heard a few voices on the ayes. So I don't know if council is comfortable recording it as everyone else who did not abstain voting for, or if council wanted to record your votes.
Give me your thoughts on it. You think we should ask for the vote?
I think.
But,
Yeah.
okay.
I'm comfortable recording my vote, Lisa. For aye.
Stuart also voted.
Stuart and Lisa, yes.
Okay, the others, can we hear you, please? If you did not abstain, there were none against. So if you did not abstain, then
I proposed Patricia Bradley.
Sure.
Sorry, I had my hand up, but if you all prefer for us to vocally say, I can do that.
Yes. Sorry, we're not seeing.
Seeing, okay, so Annie,
right
yes, yeah.
Pierre Foster voting for aye.
Sure. Thanks.
And Mr. Chair, you're hearing me okay? This is Harrison.
I'm here. Yeah, sure. I'm hearing you good, Harrison.
Very good. Thank you.
Yes. Just not seeing you, but hearing you. So anyone that might have had their hand up, I wouldn't have seen it. How are you with that now then, John?
Yes, so that's
That's good. Okay, we move on to WP05, aggressor, Bloody Bay Marine Park.
Do you want to take this on?
I can take that one, yes, ma'am. So as council will recall, the DOE had received a request for a Bloody Bay entrance permit from the Cayman aggressor. This was just renewing their long-standing permit, but for their new vessel. However, the regulations say that for the permit, it has to be under a certain length limit of the boat. We had a couple of different references for the length of the Cayman aggressor vessel, some of which were longer than the required amount. So because of that, the Department of Environment didn't want to just renew it or not. We would propose that obviously the aggressor can continue to operate sort of by matter of law while their application is being reviewed, but that they are asked for an ad measurement survey, which is a measurement of the ship as it currently is, and to show the overall length and tonnage of the Cayman Aggressor 5, just to get a up-to-date confirmation of what that absolute overall length is. And they will be given, say, a month for that to be produced, or such longer time as may be reasonable, given it is so close to the holidays right now. Also, there's a few other items that came up as part of the discussions around this. Council may recall was a question of their ability to overnight or not on the public moorings. Currently, the vessel is a little bit too large to spend that long on the moorings without damaging the moorings, particularly if any kind of weather turns on them. So we would encourage them to consider in placing their own overnight moorings for that reason, and only use the public moorings for temporary short stops. Council was also interested in having the DOE review the Bloody Bay directives so that any other updates that might be needed regarding vessel size or anything else that needs to be handled. And the department will be trying to work towards more overall rules for the public moorings in the next year, considering that we occasionally see these larger vessels who we need to be very clear on whether or not the moorings can handle them for the vessel's certainty as well as the public's.
Okay, so as highlighted by John, this had been moved by DOE. So are they, first of all, I should ask, are there any questions with regards to what is being proposed there? And if not, then let me have a seconder.
I'll second it. Harrison.
Harrison, thanks. Those in favor?
Yes.
Adrian.
Yes, Patricia Bradley.
Yes. Yes, Stuart.
Yes,
Yes.
Lisa.
Yes, Pierre.
Yes, Anik.
Yes, Richard.
Thanks. So then, are there any against? And the abstentions?
I think I have to abstain because I'll probably end up signing the permit.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. We move on then, and the other ratification, WP06, habitable overwater dwelling.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. As members are aware, there have been various applications, both a coastal works application and a planning application for overwater bungalows being constructed in Little Cayman. When the DOE became aware of the potential for these applications to come forward, we met with other government agencies who had some kind of regulatory or policy role in approving the overwater bungalows. And at that time, it was very much position was advanced that we needed as a country to adopt guidelines or policy in relation to the approval of these structures, similar to the guidelines and policies that have been developed in places like Belize and Jamaica and other countries in the region. So the National Conservation Act, specifically Section 39J, provides that the council shall, or one of the duties of the council would be in promoting the adoption of guidelines by entities for the integration of conservation issues into their decision-making processes and for the achievement of the sustainable use of natural resources. Noting that a recent proposal for habitable overwater dwellings fell within two regulatory processes, i.e. the coastal works process and the planning approval process, and in order to promote more cohesive government regulation with less uncertainty for the public, the DOE proposed a draft interim policy for the processing of these applications, which at this time is limited to a policy in relation to approving these structures in marine protected areas. The reason for that will become clear. The National Conservation Council reviewed the original draft policy, and based on that review, the DOE made two changes, adding references to the marine park regulations and the National Tourism Policy. Council considered the revised draft at its 29th of September 2021 working group meeting and decided to adopt the policy. 6 votes in favor with 3 abstentions. Myself, Deputy Tim Austin, and the chair did not vote. Myself and Tim abstained because we were involved in drafting the interim policy. In the absence of any other defined agreed process for this type of infrastructure approval, and until such a process is developed, the council strongly recommended to the cabinet that the proposed draft guidelines are used to guide decision making for these types of structures in marine protected areas. the recommendation was respectfully made to the ministry that the proposed interim guidelines be taken on to cabinet for adoption. It was further recommended that ultimately a more comprehensive policy be developed for all overwater habitable structures, not just for those proposed in marine protected areas. This would obviously need to include stakeholder and public engagement. However, because of the urgent need for having some sort of framework for informing the decision-making process around the current application, it is proposed that the National Conservation Council ratify the decision to recommend to Cabinet that the proposed interim draft guidelines are used to guide decision-making for habitable overwater dwellings in marine protected areas, and that a more comprehensive policy be developed for all overwater habitable structures in a manner that includes stakeholder and public engagement and consultation.
Thanks, Ms. G. Okay, Council, the question is that the proposal be ratified.
Just a question for me, is there an opportunity for kind of minor text amendments to the draft document? I just noticed that towards the end of the section, it's kind of hard to describe exactly what it is, but there's a reference to the draft national planning framework, and there's a quoted section of text which I'm not sure where that's taken from, but it doesn't read exactly as anything that's written in the national planning framework. And I don't think any changes I make would change the tone of the draft policy. It's just to kind of correct that text in there, if there's a possibility to do that.
Absolutely. So
it's not in the motion, John. Richard is talking about in the appendix.
the appendix.
The actual guideline.
Sorry. Yeah, actually, yeah, it's on page 3 of the guidelines. Yeah, just about there. There's a
up a bit.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, it just says, whilst the draft national planning framework, blah blah blah. There's just a section in inverted commas that I don't think that text is from that document. So I could just find a correction for that if you'd allow me to do that subsequent to the meeting.
Sure. If the targeted sustainable development areas, is that the phrase, Richard, that you?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't believe that text is in the draft national planning framework.
I believe that is meant to be from the national tourism policy.
Yes, that's what it is.
That's the reference. Yeah.
Yeah, so we need to just, I think that's what happened myself, Lisa, is that somehow got conflated. Yeah, I don't think that was meant to be quoting the draft national planning framework, but the tourism policy, the national tourism policy. So we'll make that amendment. Thanks for picking that up, Richard.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thanks, Richard. Is there any other question, thought someone has on it before we take a vote on it?
Well, not specifically to delay the voting, but just to ask what, if any, response have we had from the ministry and or cabinet on this, given that it's already been submitted to them?
Yeah. I don't believe that we've had anything come back yet, Lisa, but if anything came back in the last 3 days, 2 days, I should say, I wouldn't know because I just haven't had a catch up yet with the EMU folks this week. But to the best of my knowledge, nothing has come back specifically on this.
Okay.
It is on my list to follow up on when I next have an HRD meeting, which will hopefully be early December.
And in terms of determination of the applications?
Nothing as far as I'm aware.
Okay.
Again.
Mhm.
Okay, so the question is that we, National Conservation Council, ratify the decision to strongly recommend to the Cabinet that A, the proposed interim draft guidelines are used to guide decisions making for habitable overwater dwellings in marine protected areas, and B, a comprehensive policy should be developed for all overwater habitable structures in a manner that includes stakeholders and the public engagement and consultation. And we have a mover.
I move, Lisa.
I second.
Second.
Tricia.
And again, those in favor?
Aye.
Stuart.
Aye. Anik.
I, Pierre.
Hi, Adrian.
Any against? And our abstentions?
I, Richard, abstain.
And Gina.
Okay, thanks. Ratified. WP07 Seabird Conservation Plan.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to ask Council's indulgence to withdraw this document from consideration today, simply because in the last day or so, and doing some last minute review on this document, we've unearthed some logistical problems with some of the proposals, particularly in relation to the critical habitat designation, and we would like to just have some more time to work out the issues that we've identified. So we will be bringing this back to council early in the new year, but we just became aware of an issue with the recommendations for the critical habitat that we need to sort of work through.
Okay.
Just begging council's indulgence for that.
Just highlighting the fact then that WP07 Seabird Conservation Plan is being withdrawn at this time and will be brought back to council in the near future. Brings us down to our section 6, and it's just dates for our future meetings, and these are general meetings: March 23rd, June 15th, September 21st, December 14th. And of course, as for the time being, as we know and understand it now, like this meeting, most of these would continue to be by electronic means, Zoom, YouTube, that sort of thing. So they're the dates then for the general meetings. Taking us on to section 7. Is there any other business, anything else that needs to be brought to the table this afternoon? So if there's nothing else, Then we have reached the point of our adjournment. And
Oh, I think there is one matter, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, I was just looking at the minutes.
sure,
myself,
sure, Ms. G.
that council will recall also that the chair received a letter some time ago from Jackson Law regarding the council's decision to require an environmental impact assessment for the proposed DART pad. Mr. Jackson's letter to the chair basically alleged that the council's decision was unreasonable. There were a number of statements against the principles of natural justice. Several allegations were made about the council's decision. So we took the decision to also have legal advice on that letter and to have our lawyer basically reply on the chair's behalf. And I just wanted to report that that has now been done. The letter went out. Can anybody remember the date? Last week, I think it was
last week.
Sometime. And I don't know whether council would like to have a copy of the letter. Would members like to have a copy of that letter?
Yes, please.
Yes, please.
Yes,
Yes.
please.
Yes, I would.
Yes, we'll make that available.
Needless to say, the advice was that council's actions were in accordance with the National Conservation Act and the EIA directive, and that the decision was completely reasonable and lawful and complied with basically all the requirements of the Constitution and the National Conservation Act. So when you get the letter, you will be able to see the details, but we will send that copy to you.
Thank you.
No problem.
Okay, thanks everyone. Is there anything else? Any other thoughts that might have come to mind that you would want to table at this time?
No.
And if not, then I move the adjournment. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you,
you.
Mr. Chair.
Have a
Thank
safe
you.
holiday.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.